So, what happens when life gets messy, when there's divorce, debt, poverty, regret, and all the other ways people get left behind? Well then, holiness is not just about rules, it's about protecting human dignity, even when life breaks down. And in Deuteronomy chapter 24, we're going to unpack marriage, generosity, justice, and the obligation to notice the vulnerable. And I'll give you one immediate action to make your faith more merciful in this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get a little bit of context into the chapter. So, Deuteronomy chapter 24 gives laws about divorce, remarriage, military exemption, the fair treatment of the poor, pledges, wages, gleaning, and remembering Egypt. So, remember how God brought the Israelites out of Egypt during the Exodus story, and how this applies when administering justice. So, this chapter is actually very practical. It's a bunch of rules, or laws, and it shows that covenant holiness includes how one handles broken relationships, property, labor, and the people who have the least power. The most interesting part of this chapter is Jesus himself is quoted to have been questioned about this chapter by the Pharisees, and his responses are quite interesting. He revises some of the laws in this chapter because of, and he actually gives a motivation for some of the laws in this chapter. Okay, let's take a look at verses 1 to 4. And this is going to be on divorce, remarriage, and marriage purity. Why does God regulate broken marriage instead of pretending it does not happen? Interesting. Verse 1. Suppose a man enters into marriage with a woman, but she does not please him because he finds something objectionable about her. So he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house. She then leaves his house and goes off to become another man's wife. Then suppose the second man dislikes her, writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house. Or the second man who marries her dies. Her first husband, who sent her away, is not permitted to take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that would be abhorrent to the Lord, and you shall not bring guilt on the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a possession. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, it's interesting. So he writes her a certificate of divorce. Okay, so what does this mean? In the ancient Near East, in ancient Israel, right, there is a law which allows men to initiate divorces, but women cannot initiate divorces. That's interesting. Now, what you'll notice, or what you might imagine, is that since this is the only law in the Torah which addresses the question of divorce, there were various interpretations of this, right? So there were some Torah scholars, right, who would say, look, divorce is only allowed in the case of unchastity, okay? It's only in a very specific place that divorce is allowed. But then there were other Torah scholars who are like, you know what, it doesn't matter. Even if you're dissatisfied with the marriage, you can divorce any way you would like. Now, what this means is, or what this would allow is, or what this would result in, is the abuse of women, the abuse of many women just because of this law, because women are not allowed to initiate divorces, so men are the only ones allowed to do that, and men can abuse it for any wish they please. And Jesus is actually going to talk about this in the New Testament. So, why do we need to regulate divorce at all? Because brokenness is real, and the law must deal with reality, right? Not fantasy. The text does not even celebrate divorce, right? It restrains it. It protects the women from being treated as disposable, and it prevents marriage from becoming casually reversible. But the point is covenant seriousness. When relationships break, the community must not worsen the wound. Okay, let's read verses 5 to 13. This is going to be on exemptions from war. There's also going to be pledges, mills, and kidnapping prohibition, and returning a pledge with dignity. This is all titled under miscellaneous laws, by the way. But anyway, let's read verses 5 to 13. When a man is newly married, he shall not go out with the army or be charged with any related duty. He shall be free at home 1 year to be happy with the wife whom he has married. No one shall take a mill or an upper millstone in pledge, for that would be taking a life in pledge. If someone is caught kidnapping another Israelite, enslaving or selling the Israelite, then that kidnapper shall die. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. Guard against an outbreak of defiling skin disease by being very careful. You shall carefully observe whatever the Levitical priests instruct you, just as I have commanded them. Remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on your journey out of Egypt. When you make your neighbor a loan of any kind, you shall not go into the house to take the pledge. You shall wait outside while the person to whom you are making the loan brings the pledge out to you. If the person is poor, you shall not sleep in the garment given you as the pledge. You shall give the pledge back by sunset, so that your neighbor may sleep in the cloak and bless you, and it will be to your credit before the Lord your God. Alright, biblical unlock number 2. What's going on here? So first and foremost, in verse 5, we saw that a newly married man is excused from military duty because, covenant life values formation. A new marriage needs time to be rooted in joy and shared life before it is burdened by war. And God protects the household because the health of the home is part of the health of the nation. Next thing, we see that millstones, right? We see something about millstones, right? No one shall take a mill or an upper millstone in pledge, for that would be taking a life in pledge. If someone is caught kidnapping another Israelite, enslaving or selling the Israelite, then that kidnapper shall die. So what does millstones and kidnapping have in common? But both concern life. A millstone is not a luxury object. It is how a poor household survives. The law says you cannot take away someone's means of living. And kidnapping is treated as a monstrous theft of personhood. And this is what the chapter is actually protecting: the body, the labor, and the dignity of the vulnerable. Okay? And then the last thing is, why does God care when someone pledges their cloak? The cloak that an ancient Israelite would wear is the same thing they would sleep on. Okay? So if you're taking someone's cloak, right, you're taking their very means of sleeping and their very means of sustenance. So this is actually very important. So because the poor must not be shamed in the process of receiving help, if a cloak is taken as security, it must be returned at night so that the person can sleep warmly. This is what the law is about. And we even see this in the New Testament. We're going to see this during the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is going to talk about this. So mercy here is practical and immediate. Charity should protect dignity. It should not strip it away. Okay, let's read verses 14 to 18. This is going to be paying wages fairly and remembering Egypt. And my question for you to stay engaged is, what does justice look like when someone has no power? Verse 14, you shall not withhold the wages of the poor and needy laborers, whether other Israelites or aliens who reside in your land in one of your towns. You shall pay them their wages daily before sunset, because they are poor and their livelihood depends on them. Otherwise they might cry out to the Lord against you, and you would incur guilt. 16. Parents shall not be put to the death for their children, nor shall children be put to death for their parents. Only for their own crimes may persons be put to death. Verse 17. You shall not deprive a resident alien or an orphan of justice. You shall not take a widow's garment in pledge. Verse 18. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore I command you to do this. Okay, biblical unlock number 3. We see here, why is withheld wages such a serious sin? Right? It's because labor creates dependence, and delay can mean hunger. So if you do not pay on time, right, that's a problem. And the Lord treats exploitation as a covenant violation. Israel must remember its own oppression in Egypt, which means the powerful are never to act like Pharaoh. Justice is shaped by mercy. You were once vulnerable, so do not abuse the vulnerable now. Now you may think to yourself, well, hang on a minute. Well, it says in verse 16, parents shall not be put to death for their children, nor shall children be put to death for their parents. Only for their own crimes may persons be put to death. So people may interpret this as saying, well, how can Jesus die for my sins then? Because it clearly says that he can't, it has to only be one person's sins, one person's crimes, one person has to pay for it. But it's different, okay? There are some distinctions between these two. In the original context of Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 16, it is a legal principle for humans, for human courts in ancient Israel, that justice must be personal. That is, no one should be punished judicially for someone else's crimes. It's about preventing unjust human punishment. However, when it comes to Jesus, there is something different. It is a voluntary act with a different purpose. The human justice that is talked about in Deuteronomy is contrasted with the divine redemption. Deuteronomy is about how human judges should act. The death of Jesus is a part of God's redemptive plan, not a human court applying that same rule. And furthermore, Jesus voluntarily takes on the punishment. He lays down his life, which is fundamentally different from the injustice that Deuteronomy forbids. And the idea here is, you don't want to transfer guilt in a legal punishment. But that's not what Christianity teaches. It's teaching substitutionary atonement. Jesus takes on the consequences of sin to reconcile humanity with God. Okay, let's read the final part, verses 19 to 22. Where here we're going to see the focus is gleaning for the vulnerable. And my question for you to stay focused is, why does God build generosity into harvest itself? Verse 19, when you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be left for the alien, the orphan, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all your undertakings. When you beat your olive trees, do not strip what is left. It shall be for the alien, the orphan, the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, do not glean what is left. It shall be left for the alien, the orphan, and the widow. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore I am commanding you to do this. Final biblical unlock. Why build charity into the harvest? So that provision is not left to the mood of the rich. Gleaning makes mercy structural. The widow, the orphan, the foreigner, the poor, these are not an afterthought, but a part of the harvest design. God, therefore, turns the agricultural industry, the agricultural sector in Israel, into a form of social care. And this is important because wealth is given to be shared, not to be stored. And this actually encourages us to use generosity or see generosity as part of an inbuilt blessing. Okay, that's it. Let's see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ. I think the most clear example is the divorce one, so I'm going to go through that in particular. But there are also others, okay? So let's take a look. So Deuteronomy chapter 24 shows that God's holiness bends towards mercy without losing justice. In Christ, that mercy becomes personal. He welcomes the broken, he protects the vulnerable, and he exposes exploitative practices. Jesus does not erase the law's concern for dignity. He fulfills it by making the kingdom a place where the weak are seen, the shamed are restored, and the powerful are judged by love. As we read in Matthew chapter 19, verses 3 to 9, I'm going to read all of this, right? And so some Pharisees came to him, and to test him, they asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause?" And he answered, "Have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, 'For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined, let no one separate.' They said to him, 'Why then did Moses command us to give a certificate of dismissal to divorce her?' He said to them, 'It was because you were so hard-hearted that Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery, and he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery.'" So Jesus goes right back to Genesis chapter 2 verse 24, right back to the beginning to show what the true intention for marriage was. Alright, practical applications of this chapter. What can we see? Well, I think the important thing is you can identify, one person, one group around you who would benefit from practical help. That is, whether it is a concrete action, a meal, a payment, a visit, a job lead, something like this. And the second thing is to monitor the way you handle your time, property, money. Does this protect or does this embarrass people? Okay, so if you look at something that you're doing right now, it's important that you can try and reflect and change on some habits so that you're able to adequately assess whether or not this is dignifying to not only yourself, but to your God and to the people around you. Alright, well that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. We learnt that Deuteronomy chapter 24 regulates brokenness rather than pretending it does not exist. God protects marriage, labor, dignity, and survival in the same chapter. The poor are not to be humiliated through pledges, wage theft, or neglect. Gleaning turns generosity into a structural habit, not a feeling, and that remembering oppression should make the community gentler, fairer, and more merciful. Next time we're going to move from mercy into in everyday life to the protection of shared memory and fairness in Deuteronomy chapter 25. We're going to look at just weights, levirate, marriage, and Amalek warning. So this is going to be important because God wants a people who remember both justice and mercy. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.